Welcome to The Long Run. This is a podcast for biotech adventurers. I'm your host, Luke Timmerman. The name for this show comes from what you could call the ultimate long run in capitalism. There are the long product development cycles, the huge expense involved in creating new drugs, and the extreme risk and uncertainty. There are no shortcuts in biotech, no overnight success stories. Still, the men and women who strive to apply science for the betterment of human health have a historic opportunity. We're reaping the dividends from decades of basic biomedical research. Some amazing new treatments have come forward the past few years. Many more are in the works. But new treatments with promise still often get blindsided by dangerous side effects. Bringing these drugs all the way to the market, ensuring the benefits outweigh the safety risks, and then making the drugs widely available are all huge challenges. We can't agree on what fair pricing looks like. Biotech's relationship with the society that sustains it has never been more tenuous. This is a long and perilous journey. This show will seek to shine light on the biomedical enterprise through one-on-one conversations with leaders in the field of biotech. I'm super excited to get started. The first episode is a conversation with John Maraganore. He's the CEO of Cambridge, Massachusetts-based Alnylam Pharmaceuticals, a leading developer of drugs designed to work through RNA interference, or gene silencing. Maraganore has been with the company since 2002. The company has raised more than $2 billion in that time and has a portfolio of drug candidates at various stages of development that make it worth about $7 billion as of this recording. In its early days, Alnylam rode a wave of hype, much like CRISPR gene editing enjoys today. Over the years, Alnylam has engaged in sharp-elbowed legal battles over intellectual property. It endured a long stretch when the markets lost confidence in RNAi. About a year ago, a late-stage drug candidate was sunk after patients on the drug died for reasons that are still hard to fully fathom. Same thing happened just last week with a different Alnylam drug, when a patient in a hemophilia study died from a blood clot. Alnylam was forced to put that study on hold, and it lost about $1 billion in market value in a Wall Street nanosecond. Still, that's not the end of the story. Alnylam is within days of getting the last set of Phase 3 clinical trial results. It believes it needs to file its first new drug application with the FDA, hopefully by the end of this year. If the FDA allows this drug on the market, Alnylam will have to morph into a different kind of business. One that is evaluated not just on science and clinical trial data, but one that also must perform in terms of dollars and cents. This conversation was recorded in early August, and we discussed some of Alnylam's history and current hot industry issues like drug pricing. Apologies if it feels a little dated without any mention of the recent death in the hemophilia study. But I think that the issues discussed here are still very much timely and in the news, and Maraganore is well positioned to comment on them as the newly elected chairman of the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. Before we get started, a couple of quick plugs. If you like this show, you'll love my subscription newsletter, Timmerman Report. You can go to timmermanreport.com to subscribe. Also, when you go there, please share the link to the Long Run podcast on your social networks. Once I have the show listed on iTunes and Stitcher, please tell your friends to get the feed there. The next episode will feature a conversation with Katrine Bosley, the CEO of Editas Medicine, a CRISPR genome editing company. You won't want to miss that. That'll come shortly. I hope you enjoy this initial episode for now, and let me know what you think. I'm just getting warmed up. Now, join me for the long run. Welcome, John Maraganore. You're the CEO of Alnylam Pharmaceuticals. You've been there, I believe, since 2002, so this is now 15 years on the job. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's what it takes. This is a long haul business. It's a marathon, no doubt.
Well, and this is why I thought you would be such a great guest to have on a show like this titled The Long Run, which is really about this journey that it takes, the ups and downs, the trials and tribulations to develop a new drug. And I think your experience at Alnylam really epitomizes a lot of what this business is about, or attempting to be about. So I think just for listeners who may not be all that familiar with you and the Alnylam story, maybe we can just walk through some of the history of what this company is about. So what was going on there in 2002 that drew you to this in the first place?
Well, I mean, look, Alnylam got started around a big, bold vision of taking the Nobel Prize-winning discovery of RNA interference and harnessing that natural biological mechanism to create a whole new category of drugs by essentially silencing disease-causing genes, more specifically by targeting the messenger RNA that encodes the disease-causing proteins that exist in virtually all maladies. And so that big, bold vision back in 2002, venture-backed company, we had intellectual property that we brought in from academic institutions, sort of classic, biotech story, if you will, venture money, the IP consolidation, and then off we went to sort of figure out how to take the science and actually make something good out of it at the end of the day. And it was raw science. I mean, we're talking about Nature papers and stuff done in cell culture and in C. elegans and hardly zero in vivo data at the time when we got started with this approach. And we then had to figure out painstakingly how to conquer the technical hurdles that existed with RNAi, the big one being delivery of these molecules, to ultimately make them viable as clinical medicines and clinical studies, and ultimately for the market. And so we're now in the late stages of our clinical journey with our most advanced program, just about to report phase 3 data, literally in the next 6 to 8 weeks. So pretty exciting time for the company. Lots of people knocking wood and crossing fingers and stuff like that. But we are really coming to this part of our journey where, if all goes well, we should be a commercial stage company in 2018.
Well, now that's a really interesting transition, and I want to talk about that later here in the show. But just to back up a bit, these were really heady days when you got started in the early 2000s. RNA interference, this was going to be that next big modality. We had small molecules, which were good at certain things, but couldn't access every target in biology. And large molecules, proteins, antibodies could do some very good specific things, but again, couldn't reach all the targets, largely confined to the surface of cells, not inside.
Yep.
And RNAi provided this idea of incredible specificity to a disease-related protein at the transcription before it's really manifesting in a horrible diseased way. So specificity and then access to a whole range of targets. I mean, people really thought that this was a great story. This is going to be the third big leg of the stool in pharmaceuticals.
It had the same rational exuberance, I think is the right way to frame it, that you see today with gene editing and CRISPR-Cas9, for example. And
it was
so back
CRISPR
in those
back
days,
then.
It was CRISPR back then, or CRISPR is RNAi, 10 years forth. It really is that same type of excitement, enthusiasm about where it can go, what it can do, how it can transform medicine, and so forth. And we lived those days in 2002. I think in 2002, or beginning of 2003, when I just joined the company, Science Magazine made it the breakthrough of the year, for example. And it was really that type of moment of time for the science. But we always knew from the beginning that it would take time to figure out how to make these into drugs. And it did. And it took a lot of money as well. We've invested $2.1 billion since inception behind this overall quest. And we've raised $3.3 billion to date since inception from, the equity markets, venture, from partners and R&D funding from even government sources. And so it is a remarkable story, but it is exactly what we expected to have happen. I remember talking to our board at the way beginning and saying, look, this is going to be a 10-year journey at least. It's going to take billions of dollars to make this happen. And here we are, billions of dollars later, 15 years later, it's exactly what it takes.
Well, maybe you thought it would take that long and take that much money, but the outside world tends not to think in such long terms.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. And a lot of people on the investment community side, for example, say, God, it's taken so long. What's happened? And this is why you have these classic curves of new technologies where there's a period of time, and we lived it too, of massive despair and consternation and belief that it will never get there. Andy Pollack is one of my favorite reporters, now retired, as you know, Luke, and he wrote an article in 2010 around the excitement around RNAi has fizzled, and I keep that article in front of my desk so I can constantly be reminded that what you do today is what you do today, but people ultimately don't have a lot of patience around what we do. But the reality is it takes a lot of time to do it.
Well, and it tracks the classic Gartner hype cycle, right?
Yeah.
There's this exciting thing happens, a technology trigger, like the discovery of RNA interference. And then people's imaginations start running wild. They think, boy, This can be applied in any number of ways, and it's going to fill all these white spaces. And then eventually people realize, gosh, this is harder than it looks, and it's going to take longer. Yeah. In the case of RNAi, it was about delivery into the cells. This was a very hard chemistry problem to protect the siRNA molecules so that they could get into the cells, right?
Yeah.
And it happened to coincide. It's funny you mentioned that 2010 article because that was just as we were coming out of the financial crisis. So you kind of had a double whammy there where people were losing faith in RNAi as a field. Right at the same time, we're still very much in the throes of a global financial crisis or just coming out of it.
It was during that very dark period, as we all remember, that, I think everybody felt, boy, maybe biotech will never be successful as a whole class. How will we raise money in the future? So it was a dark period. Fortunately, we were, I think, mostly lucky, maybe a little bit of smart, but mostly lucky in raising capital robustly in that period of exuberance and effectively bringing in a lot of money. So, even in the darkest days around Lehman Brothers collapse and pharma exiting the RNAi field, we had hundreds of millions of dollars of capital on our balance sheet. And that really was fortunate.
You could weather the storm.
Fortunate. Yeah, we had the cash to weather the storm. And as a board, we never lost conviction. It's really interesting. During those dark times, I got to tell you, Luke, we had data in-house that made us incredibly encouraged and willing to persevere the storm. Our board, there was never an occasion as a board where we said, hey, maybe we ought to start going to plan B instead of plan A here and look at some different technology or look at some different opportunity to build a company. We never wavered on this overall quest, in part because the science that we were saying was very encouraging and very promising. But it wasn't until late 2011 that we were able to convince the outside world that we could actually do this. And I'll never forget the first patient that we saw in one of our clinical studies where there was a clear RNAi effect in that patient, patient 5003 from one of our TTR phase 1 studies. And that response was unequivocal. It was clearly an RNAi response. It was black and white. And that was the beginning of the outside world saying, oh my gosh, I think these guys might actually be able to do it. And that was just an awesome period for the company.
But during that period, you were very clearly focused on getting more rigorous data. That was what clinical trial data, not just a couple of anecdotes here and there, needed to convince the skeptics.
Yes, and we managed to do that, right? So in that period between 2011 and 2015, for the most part, although probably most acutely between 2011 and 2014. It was really all around getting human efficacy data and safety data to convince the outside world and pharma partners that we could actually do this. We could actually make it happen. And that sort of peaked in the beginning of 2014 with the large deal that we did with Sanofi Genzyme around our rare disease pipeline, which really was, that was our fun JP Morgan meeting where we announced those data. We also acquired Cerna from Merck, which was, back in 2002, 3, 4. It was our competitor. Merck bought them in 2005 for $1.1 billion, and we bought it from Merck for $175 million in the beginning of 2014. So we consolidated that part of the story too. But that was really sort of the peak period where we had definitively convinced the outside world, our investors, the clinicians and so forth, that we can do it. And then what's happened is that people are now waiting for phase 3 data. It's not enough anymore to knock down a disease gene in a human. I mean, that's great, but they don't care so much about that. What they care about is what's your phase 3 data going to look at. So we're in a different period, if you will, now from where we were in 2014, where it was really around early clinical data. Now it's really late stage clinical data, and then soon enough it'll be revenues, right? It'll be what is our revenue ramp in 2018, 19, 20 that's going to convince people that these can be commercial successes.
Well,
so it's amazing how that journey goes.
You're going to be evaluated on a whole different set of criteria once you
bet.
graduate to become a true commercial enterprise.
You bet.
You're now in R&D. You're still an R&D only enterprise, about to make that transition. Really, a company at that important crossroads. I think of it, and not many companies are able to make that transition. Because the thing that made them great in R&D is very different from what makes a company successful in the commercial realm. I mean, it's different kind of people, different kind of metrics. I mean, different cultures, and it's a challenge to hold this together. And you're going through this now. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about holding on to the spirit of Alnylam while becoming successful in a different kind of way?
Well, I think part of it, and so we're living this exactly to your point as we speak, right? And so part of this is that we have maintained and will maintain scientific excellence in our RNA as a company, right? We're an RNA company, so we have to put it all in our RNA, not our DNA. And so, that has to be preserved, and that very much has been preserved as we've been making this transition now over the last 12, 18 months with, new people from the commercial side coming into the company. They get that. They've bought into that as a fundamental tenet. The other part of this, which of course, being a company focused in the rare diseases is critical, is that the patient is front and center of everything we do. And so, we cared as much about patients in the early days at Alnylam, where we can imagine our therapies making a difference in their lives. Now we're closer to the patient than ever before. And the people that we brought in on the commercial side are focused on really what's the impact we can make in the patient's life. And that has been a critical element. But there are, as we grow and scale, there are processes that have to be put in place. There are, we're doing, GMP manufacturing. We're doing, obviously, as we think about our sales organization, we have to think about compliance and training and education. So these are all elements that have to be integrated within the company and are being integrated within the company that are different. And the book around what got you here won't, or what is it, whatever it is, what didn't get you, what got you here won't get you going forward. That's very true. And part of that is to bring in the right people to help you do it.
Now, we should say that, you're getting ready for your first product, knock wood, hopefully, will be this patisiran for TTR amyloidosis. And you have a data readout, as you alluded to, later in September that you expect. And then
we do.
All goes well, you should be able to file an NDA to the FDA by the end of this year and hopefully be on the market in 2018. And then you've got other products in your pipeline too, with different kinds of profiles. I know one is a subcutaneous injection form of this very drug, TTR.
Yep.
But there's others for genetic rare diseases. You even have an RNAi version of a PCSK9 inhibitor, which I think poses an interesting kind of profile. So how do you think about pricing these kind of drugs. This is the big issue in facing the industry, and something that every executive needs to think about, even before you get to the cusp of the market, as you are.
Yeah. Well, let's get to that in just a second. But let me build on an earlier point that you raised, which is, I mean, what's exciting about Alnylam right now is that, and if all goes well, and I'm sure there'll be ups and downs, right? Because there's no such thing as a straight line. But we really are positioned with patisiran to launch our first product in 2018. And then with givosiran, which is our drug in porphyria, and fitusiran, which is our drug in hemophilia, we're positioned to have additional commercial product launches in 2019 and 2020 with those two products. And then Medicines Company is developing inclisiran, which is that PCSK9 product, and that is likely to be a product where they're guiding for the readout to happen in 2019 and be able to be commercial in 2020. And so, it's rare in biotech to have a company like Alnylam where we're going to have not just one product get into the market, but potentially many over a relatively short period of time. And so that creates a profile which is very, very important. Now, on the pricing side, and your point about pricing, this is front and center, of my mind, almost every day of the week. It is obviously front and center of the whole industry. But as we think about our orphan medicines in our pipeline, we obviously have to reflect on these medicines providing significant value for patients. And the pricing for these medicines is going to be consistent with the value delivered. We're building value dossiers for all of these medicines to understand the real economic value that they can generate to society and to overall healthcare costs. And that has to be very robust. It has to be very well put together. We're meeting with payers on these programs to basically understand how they think about a product like the ones that we're developing and how they think about reimbursement for those type of products. And so we're doing a lot on the pricing side to really understand that landscape very specifically for our products. Now, these are orphan drugs, and they're going to be priced likely with 6 digits, which is very much consistent with orphan drug development and pricing. But it has to be supported by the real economic value that they deliver. Even if it's an orphan drug, if it's just making people feel a little bit better every day and not having a big impact, you're not going to be able to get significant premium pricing on a product like that. But long and short of it is we're spending a lot of time on the issue, Luke.
You take a person with a rare disease who has no options and basically give them their life back and enable them to go back to work and be a productive citizen, productive worker. That's worth a lot. I think most people would agree that is.
It's huge. I mean, I'll give you a good example. We have a patient in our hemophilia program that has hemophilia B with inhibitors, which is really probably at the pinnacle of the unmet need in the hemophilia space. These patients have no prophylaxis. They have enormous burden. This patient was self-administering Novo-7, which is recombinant factor 7A, to basically control his bleeding 2 to 3 times a day. Novo-7 has notoriously a very short half-life, and have had to give 2 to 3 IV infusions every day to basically just be able to not die. And he's been in the fitusiran study getting a once-monthly sub-Q injection. His life is transformed. He doesn't use Novo-7 anymore. His bleeding is well under control, and he felt good enough to get engaged. So it's one of these wonderful things that we get to see in the rare disease space, where these medicines can be truly transformative for patients. And we've seen the same type of results in our patisiran phase 2 open label study, and in our givosiran study in porphyria, we've seen amazing results. And so this transformation is something which can really be realized with these type of medicines.
But when you mentioned value, and that has been the buzzword, what is the value of these things? How do we calculate it? How do we, I guess, square it out over time? How do you think about that definition?
Well, I mean, let's take patisiran and talk about that drug. This is a drug for a disease, hereditary ATTR amyloidosis, which is a progressive disease. It's uniformly debilitating. Basically, patients over time, lose their ability to walk. They lose their ability to put their shirt on, to hold their fork, because they have a peripheral neuropathy that makes them unable to do that. They ultimately require a cane, then they require a wheelchair, and then they ultimately waste away. They have an autonomic neuropathy as well, and so they can't digest food. They have trouble innervating, parts of their body that are needed, and they can die from infection within typically a decade. So this is, and the only thing, sadly, the only thing about these patients that doesn't go bad is their mind. So they get they have the horrible experience of actually seeing their body decay in front of their very, very eyes, not unlike ALS in many ways. So what's the value of having a drug that stops the disease progression? What's the value of having a drug that in some cases might even reverse the underlying disease? You can calculate that value. You can calculate, the cost to the healthcare system for dealing with the burden of that patient when they get to later stages of their disease, and how do you economically avert that cost with a new medicine, right? So that there is a very sound way to quantify the value of a medicine like that in a way that then has to support, then has to be looked at by payers, and they have to say, wow, the value of the drug, the price of the drug that we have to pay for annually is worth it, given the cost savings that can be generated in the system. Not even to speak of the benefit to the patient beyond just the costs. And that type of value is measurable.
Yes, but here's the thing: the cost that the payer is being asked to pay is tangible and upfront and large, and the downstream savings are a projection. However you slice it. And time has to go on. That patient has to live 10, 20 years and prove out that we're getting the savings that we thought we were going to get based on an extrapolation from the clinical trial experience of, say, maybe 6 or 12 or 18 months. Is this part of just the fundamental rub?
Well, it is part of the fundamental rub, and there's really no ways around that. We have to, as a society, we have to say, do we just want to let people die and die a miserable death? I think our society would say, no, we can't let that happen. So how do we think about the value that's being delivered with the new medicine in relationship to the overall costs that are being averted, and how do we think about that at a population level? Because obviously, you have a given payer that has a given patient in their system has to sort of look at the entirety of the data to understand the economic value. They can't just do it at the individual level. Now, having said that, we are believers and will be proactive about this, that having risk-sharing agreements is a good thing to do. And so we've constructed many different ways in which our drugs would be offered and available to payers under a risk-sharing agreement, where the drug is being reimbursed provided it provides benefit to the patients. And we have to define with payers what that benefit is, or what the surrogate for that benefit would be, but we can do it. And I think that type of an approach, which is being used elsewhere as well in the industry, is a prudent approach for pricing medicines, especially medicines that are expensive.
And if it doesn't provide the benefit that you expect after a couple of years, then what? We don't get paid. You pay them. You give them a money back guarantee.
Well, that sort of the money back approach is more complicated, right? There's a lot of accounting challenges with that that would make our lives and many people's lives very difficult. But there are ways of coming up with constructs, and I think the industry is being very creative about this with payers, where you reach an agreement, you can form it in a contract in many ways around what is going to be measured at what time point to indicate that the drug is acting effectively. At least in the schemes that we've come up with, it may be that the drug is offered for free until there's proof that the drug is working, after which time the drug would be reimbursed. And so there are schemes, many different schemes that one can imagine. Obviously, if the patient is no longer feeling better from the drug and individually and is no longer is progressing in their disease, they're going to come off the drug anyway, right? There's the physicians and the patient will decide, hey, I'm not benefiting from this, and they will naturally come off. But you want to create a better framework for reimbursement that could be more objective and more driven based on population data as opposed to individual data, which is always very complicated. So these are approaches, Luke, that we're very actively discussing both internally and with payers, and believe that this is a type of approach that would be important for the medicines that we want to create. I'll say one thing too, which is, we have a wonderful opportunity at Alnylam because we are just now becoming a commercial stage company. And so we can be the type of commercial stage company we want to be, as opposed to having to deal with legacy burdens and past history and stuff like that. And our goal and our vision is to be as creative as a commercial stage company as we've been as an R&D company. We want to be viewed by our market and by payers and physicians and others to be a partner and a solution-oriented business, just as we've been a partner to patients and scientists as an R&D company. And that's a real opportunity for Alnylam that I'm personally very passionate about. And you'll hear a lot more about that going forward from our company.
Do you structure any special incentives in your commercial enterprise to try to ensure that? And when I ask this, I think of classic sales reps working on commission. The more they can boost prescription volume, the more they get paid, and that isn't necessarily always well aligned with our society's desire to get a good bang for the buck or to get the best outcome for the patient.
Yeah. Well, we haven't gotten to that yet, and it's a very important question and one that I think makes a lot of sense. We have talked a lot about what do we want to do from a external disclosure perspective when we talk about our products, our product launches commercially, and do we want to focus on revenues and earnings, or do we want to focus on patient numbers and patient impact? Is there a way to create a sort of a triple P&L that has, if you will, earnings, but also patient numbers and some measure of patient impact as well? And you basically create a different way to look at your performance as a company than just the numbers. And so we've talked a lot about that, but the specifics around a compensation program for our ultimate sales force, our account managers, is a detail that we haven't gotten to yet. But I think it's one that will have to marry up with a more progressive way to think about commercializing medicines, and it's something that we're quite interested in. But we haven't gotten to solutions there yet.
That would be a fascinating development because I don't really. I can think of science-based companies that behave in a responsible way, but the pharmaceutical industry has gotten a bad rap in recent years, and a lot of people really see it as price gouging. There's all kinds of examples in the news that it's really about maximizing that share price and boosting the income statements and the balance sheets. And that's really not consistent with, I think, that the mission that, gets a lot of people to work each day in this business. There's a real tension there between the reason the companies like Alnylam exist, and that is to solve serious medical problems, and, the capitalist imperative to make a profit while you do that. That's legit and that's real, and we need to find a way to bring those things into balance so that they can, so that one doesn't subsume the other.
Yeah, and look, Luke. I mean, you're absolutely right. There are important ways to think about this differently, and I think that we can do it differently. I assure you, the people that come to Alnylam every day, our scientists, our clinicians, even our new commercial colleagues that come into the company every day, we're focusing today on patient impact and making a difference in people's lives. And if you preserve that going forward, and some companies have done that well in the past. I mean, I think Genzyme did that very well, and Henry's leadership at Genzyme ensured that the patient was always put front and center. That is something which we believe in wholeheartedly, and we have to preserve that even when we're commercial, and we're also committed to bring a reward to our shareholders. But it goes down to the George Merck quote around, really focusing on the patient, and the profits will follow thereafter. And I do believe in that wholeheartedly.
This is a time in which we're talking about the social contract, really. I mean, Brent Saunders has come out with that phrase. You've used that phrase. How do you think about that bargain, that fundamental bargain that we have between society and the pharmaceutical industry?
I am passionate on this topic, as you know, Luke. I mean, I think that it's the wonderful thing we have created here in R&D, discovery, and then commercialization of breakthroughs and innovation. And I believe that we have a system that works, that's been working. Hatch-Waxman specifically ensures that the drugs that we create today are ultimately free for our kids and for our kids' kids. And that is because we have a limited period of time to reap the reward for our innovation. 10, 12 years is typically the period. And thereafter, our drugs become generic. Others can come in and they can copy our drugs, and they can get approval for those copycat versions, and they can go off and sell them at discounts to what we sell them at. And our prices will decrease as a result as well, because we'll have to. And that's the wonderful feature of our social contract that we've got, and it's one that I think needs to be kept center in the entirety of our discussion around drug pricing. And I think the types of things that Scott Gottlieb is doing at FDA right now with accelerating generic drug approvals, I wholeheartedly believe in. I had a dinner with Henry Termeer just a couple months before he died. And he's such a wonderful man. We were talking about this drug pricing topic and how should we deal with it. And Henry said to me in his Dutch accent, he said, John, all we have to do is to preserve the incentives for our innovation. He said, everything else that's incremental, everything else that when drugs go generic is open for discussion. It's open for negotiation. We should be willing to find compromises and willing to find ways to basically accept that once our period of exclusivity goes away, that we of course should be obsolesced, and that obsolescence turns out to be an amazingly positive thing for innovation, because companies can get really innovative when they've got a major patent cliff coming up. They've got to figure out a way to fill that gap, right?
Necessity is the mother of invention.
You bet. And so I think this social contract that we have is such a critical element of why the system in so many ways can work well. And I think what we have to do is we have to get rid of the people that have cheated the system, that are cheating the system, or trying to cheat the system, because that is wrong. They're finding loopholes in the system. And I think we have to go back to discovering, developing amazingly innovative breakthroughs. And for the innovators that do that to get a period of wonderful reward, fair. I mean, there are limits, right? But they get a period of reward, and then ultimately they get obsolesced, and those drugs become free for society for infinity, right? So
Yeah.
that's the social contract that we all have to embrace, and it is a system that can work. It creates the right incentives for the innovators to do what they do, and it creates the right return for society by virtue of the fact that these medicines essentially become free within 10, 12 years.
Yeah, and from society's end, we put a lot into this bargain too. I mean, there's the investment in basic research and an educated workforce that our tax dollars help support. There's the patent system. There's a generous reimbursement system through Medicare and our private insurance system. We're willing to pay, a lot of money for genuine innovations. Things like, in the RNA space. I mean, Spinraza is a good example, just a new drug out. It's at a very high price, but gosh, kids that are given a death sentence in a couple of years who, are now given a new lease on life. I mean, that's a very exciting thing. And
Absolutely.
so like but the biology is just now making this possible. There's so many more examples like that in the pipeline that it really does demand a rethinking of how we're going to properly reward this kind of thing. Because
I think it does, and I think we also have to celebrate that there will be remarkable cures, in some cases, one and done type cures that'll emerge from our industry, and we obviously want to make sure that we have them available and that we're willing to pay for them. And I think that there will be. Look, I think that at the end of the day, if we can keep the cycle strong, if we can have the cycle of generic drugs that get approved robustly, quickly, soon after a drug comes off patent or loses exclusivity on their data, then we're going to have a system that ultimately obsolesces a good chunk of the healthcare spending on meds, and that'll keep everything in equilibrium.
Here's something that a lot of people don't understand, and that is why we don't see more competition on price within the branded pharmaceutical industry. Even in patented areas, crowded categories. Now, I'll give an example.
Do.
Well, where?
Hep C. Look at Hep C. It's a fantastic example, right? I mean, after all the outcry on Harvoni and Sovaldi and the price and $84,000, right now it's on average it's a $21,000 price, $25,000 price to get cured of HCV for life. So basically, let's put it this way, Luke. 1 year of college tuition is what you have to pay for to get lifelong cure for HCV infection and all the associated burden that comes with that. And that's a branded space, and it's all come out of multiple companies competing in that space.
Now,
it's fantastic.
That's one example, and it's a great example. It also points to the weakness in the system with the difference between cost effectiveness on an individual basis and on a population basis. So it started at $84,000 from Gilead Sovaldi, and you could say that yes, we will save on a per patient basis more than that over the patient's lifetime in its hospital costs. But it was a $10 billion pill for our society to swallow that first year, which was hard to take. Budgets were not ready for that. And our system just isn't set up to handle more Sovaldi type things coming down the pike. And we know some of them are coming.
Yeah, but one of the things that can help a lot is for companies having discussions with payers earlier with an ability to have those discussions in a compliant manner. So, for example, I think the recent Dupiximab approval by the FDA and the launch and the reception that the drug got from a pricing perspective is an extremely good example where Regeneron and Sanofi spent time with the payers, they educated them with the PBMs, and when the drug came to market, they actually celebrated the price. They applauded the price. ICER also felt that the price was appropriate. So this is where we need to go, and part of it is to really also have reform around truthful, non-misleading communications between companies and payers so that these type of communications can happen, and nobody's caught off guard. Part of the issue with Sovaldi and that $10 billion 1 year nut was that payers were just caught completely off guard. And that should not have happened. And hopefully in the future that won't happen.
But the HCV example is one that people point to. But there are others where there are crowded categories and yet ever ratcheting upward prices, like multiple sclerosis, like rheumatoid arthritis. And this is something that people don't get. In the tech world, for example, someone comes out with a competitive version to the iPhone. It's cheaper oftentimes. That's one way people compete. And I think you could actually be in a situation like this indirectly in a way with your PCSK9 inhibitor. I can imagine with a less frequently injected version of a PCSK9 inhibitor, you could have lower cost of goods. than the antibody drugs that are on the market, and it would give you some pricing flexibility. You could undercut those people on price if you wanted to, and probably sew up most of the market. But that's not typically the way these things tend to go. Companies tend to say, well, we've got a better product profile. It's less frequently injected. Ours should be 10% more or whatever than whatever's on the market now.
Yeah. I think this is an issue. I think that you want to have, I'm a big believer that the right way to solve the overall drug pricing issue is by having competition, even in branded markets. And I think that, we need to be thoughtful about what we've seen in markets like multiple sclerosis and maybe in the RA market as well, where you haven't seen, or even diabetes with insulin, you haven't seen the net benefit of that. I think one of the biggest challenges we have as an industry is drug price increases, and I agree with Len Schleifer's comment he made in the panel that it's the one thing that happens that makes me mad at the industry as well, and I feel 100% the same way. Companies have used that because they don't have productivity. They've needed to use that as a way of growing earnings to reward their shareholders, and it's because they can't deliver on new drugs and new innovation. And I think we can do it differently. It is a crutch. It's a version of the opioid crisis for pharmaceutical executives, actually. And so it's a terrible, terrible thing. But it's one that's becoming, and it's very difficult to justify. But it is one that we're beginning to see in a market-based way. Companies come out and say, we're not going to do that anymore. So Sanofi earlier this year said that they will not increase drug prices beyond the rate of medical inflation. We saw Brent's manifesto that he came out with at Allergan. I thought a wonderful first move from his standpoint. People have criticized, that 9.9 is still a big number. I actually agree with that, but the fact is that he went out there with it, and I think it was a well thought through approach. Novo Nordisk has also committed to not have price increases, and so we're beginning to see companies basically from a responsible and moral perspective begin to self-police themselves, which I think is great, and it's something which you'll see from Alnylam. We will not partake in that practice. We just don't believe in it. We have productivity that allows us to build and grow our company without using it as a means, and it's very, very hard to justify.
Well, and those patent cliffs will force you to stay on your toes and keep innovating. Not lean on crutches.
Have to. Exactly. Have to. And those crutches go away really quickly. I mean, obviously when the branded product ultimately expires, no matter how many price increases you've taken, those prices are going to plummet dramatically.
Now, we didn't even mention this, but you've recently been elected the chairman of Bio. Is this one of those things where, they nominate you for this when you're out of the room and have to twist your arm to do it? Or is this,
it's a funny, let me, first of all, I like to call it the chair. It's a little bit more diverse oriented to say that. And in this case, it's a funny story. I was not supposed to be the chair for this 2-year term. Rather, Paul Hastings, who's the CEO of Oncomed, was going to be the chair. And Paul has had a bit of a rough run over at Oncomed over the last several months. And he called me up in late April, early May, and said, John, do you mind doing it this time for the next 2 years, and then I'll do it for the following 2 years? And I said, all right, Paul, let me think about it. I talked to my wife. I talked to my board and a couple of my colleagues here, and I decided, okay, I'm going to do it. I'll be the chair, and I'll take on this 2-year term. But it is something which I've been passionate and very involved with Bio for the last over a decade. It's actually amazing what we can get done down in D.C. I mean, I know it feels like it's impossible. It feels like it is a swamp or a sewer, whatever you want to call it. But it is remarkable what Bio has been able to do. I mean, look at the recent authorization of Fadara, which is the new version of PDUFA 6. Bio and played a major role in negotiating that 21st Century Cures that got approved and signed last year under the Obama administration. Amazing piece of legislation. Bio played a very active role in that. And so what we can do, through bio to basically ensure that we have a positive policy environment for innovation is something which is critically important and is something which, I've really enjoyed doing for the last decade and look forward to helping, Jim Greenwood and his team do that for the next 2 years.
What are the actual duties of this job?
Well, we have a board, and the board is comprised of around 50 members, and it is to basically help set the schedules for the board meetings, to help, obviously lead the board meetings so that there's a focused and appropriate discussion, keep people on schedule. It is occasionally to go, meet with politicians, in D.C., either on the Hill or as part of the administration, to basically advocate for the importance of what our industry does. And so it is certainly a commitment of time. There are 4 board meetings a year. There are many calls that occur in between. Some occasionally because there's some crisis issue that might be emerging. But it's overall to provide leadership for the organization and to help the board provide the staff at Bio with the right input on a whole range of policy issues that they deal with on a day-to-day basis.
These are issues that affect lots of companies, big and small, across the industry. It's bigger than the scope of what you're used to at Alnylam. Although, as we just discussed, Alnylam is playing in a lot of these major issues that affect everybody.
Yeah, well, which is why I always tell people I see it as part of my day job. I think that there may be some CEOs that don't get as actively involved in this, and that is up to them to decide how to best use their time. But I do believe strongly that for companies like Alnylam to be able to do what we have to do, and for us to deliver the value that we want to deliver to patients, we need to have a policy environment that allows us to do that, and we have to be vocal. It's hard to be a turtle, in this environment and just stick your head in your shell. You've got to get out there and advocate and make sure that things that get discussed on reimbursement and Medicare, Medicaid, and FDA reform and so forth, that it's done in a way that's cognizant of how innovation can be harmed or helped by those different actions.
Well, I saw you got a Twitter account recently, so I suppose that's part of it. You have to get out there and engage. You have to, advance your point of view, and then engage with people out there, reporters, analysts, and such, who don't always agree with you. Bring your flak jacket.
Yeah. But listen. I think it's great to have this debate, Luke. I think it's wonderful. People that are skeptical around the industry, are right to have the skepticism. I think it's fair. People that are excited about the industry and champions of the industry are right to be the champions. And I think it's good to have this discussion. I think we all are better as a result of that. I think when people say that we're getting away with murder or that our drug prices are astronomical, I think we can probably avoid some of the blowhard aspect of all that. But the long and short of it is, there is an important debate here that needs to be had, and I think it's great that Bio's part of it. I'm happy to be part of it as well.
Well, I think the one thing that people sometimes forget is just how much exciting science there is in the pipeline, and what that really could translate into over the next 10 or 20 years. The pace of science, the variety of things bubbling up, and just go on down the list. CRISPR, the microbiome, neuroscience, DNA sequencing enabled approaches to drug discovery. It's an amazing bounty. We're looking at, and we're
it is amazing.
And it really it's on us to think about policies to prepare for that.
Yeah, shame on us if we can't figure it out, right? Because we are dealing with a pace of biomedical discovery that's never been faster, and with cures and treatments that are just unbelievable, right? When you look at the industry pipeline and medicines that are emerging and the difference they can make in people's lives, it is it's stunning. And I think that we all need to get it right. We're all very committed to getting it right. And I think that, the American spirit is one. I mean, if we said in America that, we should just take today's medicines, we don't need to make them any better. We can just die of cancer within months and stuff like that. I mean, if that became the American spirit, then the innovation we're delivering out of the industry is overpacing the needs of society. But that will never be the case. I mean, we have a country and a society that will always want the best and always want cures and always want the best possible treatments, and they don't want to die. Nobody wants to die from cancer. And it is remarkable what this industry has created. My mom died 9 years ago from CLL, and the drugs that exist today, just 9 years later, would have cured her. She would not have died. She would have died of something else. And that's just 9 years ago. It's nothing in terms of time. And so it is this pace of discovery and what we're creating and what we can do for patients and for society is just enormous. And as a result, we have to be thoughtful about how we have the right policy environments that basically, make sure that the golden goose, the goose is not giving up those golden eggs.
Well, and the other thing too, when you mentioned the CLL example, is that this is a fragile thing. That drug, I believe, is Imbruvica, now marketed by AbbVie and J&J, that transforms CLL. And that was, if memory serves, that drug came from a basic discovery effort screening by what was Celera Genomics, I think. Yeah, and it was thrown away on the scrap heap. I mean, nobody thought this was worth anything. And a little company, Pharmaceuticals, comes along and believes in it and invested some money, raised some money, and proved that this thing, a BTK inhibitor, actually could work in a very big way. And they made billions of dollars off of it. And, the drug is now out there and helping a lot of people. It worked, but it very, very easily could have just be sitting on someone's shelf or have been just thrown in the trash.
No doubt. And then 5 to 10 years from now, I don't know the exact dates, it'll basically be a generic drug. And there'll be 2 or 3 generic manufacturers that make Imbruvica, and it will be dirt cheap forever, right? So that's the wonderful social contract that we've got, and that's the system that we need to preserve so that incentive is there for innovation, and that ultimately these medicines, once they reach their time period, they are part of the fabric of society forever thereafter.
That's sort of like the innovation dividend. We're reaping that now with statins and a lot of cardiovascular drugs.
Which is why the cost of prescription drugs has stayed between 10 and 14% for decades, because the system is actually working. Those drugs become very cheap. 13. When Lipitor came off patent, $13-15 billion of branded sales became generic overnight, right? Amazing thing. It's all good.
Well, I wish you luck with your treatment of TTR amyloidosis and hemophilia and many other things coming at Alnylam, and in adjusting this system to keep it in balance, to keep it so that each side of the social contract feels like they're getting a fair deal.
Well, thank you, Luke.
Thanks very much for being with me on this first episode of The Long Run. John, have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. You too, Luke. Be well.
Thanks for listening to The Long Run, a production of Timmerman Report. This episode represents a team effort. Thanks very much to Pedro Rosado of Headstepper Media for his work as editor and producer. Music for the show comes from D.A. Wallach. Todd Bennings created the logo, and Steve White developed the landing page on TimmermanReport.com. Next episode: how do you manage a company with the hottest gene editing technology on the planet, which can seemingly do anything, while keeping your eye on the prize of using it to create a drug? Hear what Katrine Bosley of Editas Medicine has to say about that, next on The Long Run.